We've all had the experience being really excited for a new game only for it to come out and suck. We all hate that feeling. But one thing I don't see too many people talk about as much is the inverse. Games that were expected to be bad, but were way better than expected. Sort of. This isn't just a list of games that were way better than expected, although there are many of those, but also games that had a lot going against them. Maybe they had an unrealistically short development cycle, or it's based off of an IP that was pretty hit or miss in regards to video games, or it's a direct follow-up to a not-so-great game. Whatever the case may be, these are the top 10 games that should have been bad, but weren't. Before we get started, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, or I'll make sure you are bad.
I wanted to give to you, the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
Oh, Sonic. When you think about it, a lot of Sonic games could have been on this list, and a lot of Sonic games could have been on whatever the opposite of this list is. But for this sake, let's look at Sonic Frontiers, as even though we look at it now as a game that is really good, I remember going in, there was a lot of concerns. For one, up to that point, Sonic's recent track record in 3D had been a bit spotty. While the second dimension would get games like Sonic Mania, the third axis was often getting the short end of the stick. When Sonic Frontiers was announced to not only be another 3D Sonic game, but also an open world Sonic game, people were excited, but then the first bit of gameplay started to show, and it looked rough. It did not look like it was ready to be shown, and on top of that, Sega insisted that they were not going to delay the game. However, even before Sonic Frontiers came out, the more they showed it, the better it looked. And that should be obvious, as, you know, any game basically should look better and better the more they show it, but this was a very short time frame. Regardless though, Sonic Frontiers came out and was really solid, as it laid a nice and promising foundation for future open world Sonic games, while also providing some nice combat mechanics and super fun boss fights, along with a killer soundtrack. All this is crazy when you consider the response to its initial reveal. Imagine, if you will, a developer known as Avalanche, best known for making licensed shovelware movie tie-in games, their last one being Cars 3 the video game in 2017, and their next game is in 2023. Y'all want to know what that game is? Hogwarts Legacy. Sure, Hogwarts Legacy became the best-selling game in 2023 and got some rave reviews, but let's think about this during the build to the game. This massive open world taking place in the Wizarding World, an IP that was pretty hit or miss with video games, with more misses than hits I feel, being developed by a developer whose last game was a cheap movie tie-in in 2017. Plus, Hogwarts Legacy for a while was one of those games that just felt like it was never gonna come out, but when it did, it was great and made 2023 the first year in God knows how long where the US sales charts was topped by a game other than COD or a Rockstar game. That deserves to be celebrated.
So I'm going to be giving this flavor 8.5 out of 10 scoops.
Mortal Kombat is perhaps the biggest fighting game franchise when it comes to, franchise sales. However, there is a bit of a lull period for the franchise, specifically when they tried to make spin-offs of the games and make this well-known and well-beloved fighting game franchise into non-fighting games. Games like Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero and Mortal Kombat Special Forces were both critically panned and are considered some of the worst games ever made, the latter of which led John Tobias, one of the co-creators of the series, to leave. All this points towards Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, a single-player spin-off of Mortal Kombat where you play as Liu Kang, being a bad game, but it's well-beloved. Instead of being a broken and glitchy mess, frustratingly designed, or flawed on a fundamental level, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks actually follows Liu Kang in a story that does a great job expanding the Mortal Kombat universe while also being really fun to play. In fact, it's so widely beloved that fans are clamoring for a re-release of the game. And to think of Mortal Kombat's track record with spin-offs, this is quite impressive.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
I remember back in 2017 when it was leaked that in the first year of the Switch, Mario is going to cross over with the Rabbids in an RPG, and everyone collectively responded with a resounding "what?" Needless to say, a Mario Rabbids crossover into an XCOM style RPG is not something anyone asked for, and the team over at Ubisoft who developed this game were an unproven team at the time. But beyond everyone's wildest expectations, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle ended up being way better than anyone expected. This game took the Mario characters and the Rabbids, the latter of which were reeled in, and meshed them together very well, even providing interesting story reasons as to why they are crossing over. On top of that, it looks great visually, and the combat works tremendously. Needless to say, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle has no business being as good as it is.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
I can remember when Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl was announced and people overhyped it as the Smash Killer. And when it came out, it wasn't terrible, but it was lacking in basic features and content. And then only 2 years later, we got a sequel announced, and even though it seemed to be adding a lot more, enhancing the presentation, and adding a lot more voice acting, I just wasn't excited. Probably had to do with the fact that it was being published by Game Mill Entertainment, a company that also published 3 of the most critically panned games of the year within the same 3-month span as this game's release. Maybe it had something to do with the massive nerfing of the roster, or maybe I was just let down by the first game and I just didn't want to get burned again. But regardless, I caved in and bought Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, and it is such an improvement over the first game, it's actually insane. Sure, I still feel like the roster is a downgrade from the first game, but the characters themselves are a lot of fun, the soundtrack got an insane glow up, the presentation is crazy good, the gameplay is a lot of fun, and they have a whole single-player campaign. Ironically enough, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 might just be one of the most impressive and drastic improvements between sequels since Smash 64 and Melee.
Chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Remember what I literally just said like 2 seconds ago about NASB 2 being a crazy improvement over NASB 1, just like Melee was a crazy improvement over Smash 64? Well, speaking of which, Super Smash Bros. Melee has gone down as an absolute classic and all-timer, and even though it's not exactly my favorite Smash game, I know that my favorite video game franchise of all time would not be where it is today without Melee. But considering the development of this game, that's a goddamn miracle. There was only a 2-year turnaround for this game, which is crazy when you see how much more content there is in Melee compared to 64. It's also crazy that because of the 2-year turnaround, Super Smash Bros. Melee was rushed to meet the launch window of the GameCube. In fact, stuff like wave dashing and the faster gameplay, you know, aspects of the game that many players grew to love, as well as the many clone characters like Falco, Pichu, and Young Link, are a result of Melee's rushed development. With just how rushed development was, it's astounding that Super Smash Bros. Melee isn't only great, but has held up as well as it has. Alright, I'm just gonna say it. Any publisher pivoting to live service games is making a huge mistake, especially if you are best known for single-player offerings. Warner Brothers. This was something I was saying a lot about PlayStation with their live service pivot, and I still do believe that, so much so that I was not interested in Helldivers 2, as it was a live service game that was the sequel to a game I had honestly never heard of, and really, I just didn't think it looked that good. So when it was coming out, I didn't even bat an eye, but then it actually came out and, yeah, it kind of blew up. Now, full transparency, I actually have yet to play Helldivers 2 at the time of recording. So maybe I shouldn't be calling it a good game, but seeing the overwhelmingly positive reception to this game with the crazy numbers it's been doing on both Steam and PlayStation leads me to believe that it's better than expected, and certainly better than I was expecting at least. In fact, so many people are playing it that the servers are too crowded. Helldivers 2 is a game that suffered from success, and now it's a game on my radar. Remember the Marvel's Avengers game from 2020 that failed so badly it doesn't even exist anymore? Now what if I were to tell you that the same publisher had the same developer work on another Marvel property, being Guardians of the Galaxy, at the same time with the same kind of bizarre stunt double look? I feel like most of you watching this video either didn't know there was a Guardians of the Galaxy video game that came out in 2021, or you did, but you probably forgot. But this was Crystal Dynamics right after the launch of Avengers, and they were working on this at the same time. Sure, it was revealed to not be a live service game, but it didn't look very good leading up to release, but it came out and it was great. Guardians of the Galaxy was legitimately one of the best games that came out in 2021, both unanimously and in my personal opinion, with actually great writing, stunning visuals, engaging combat and gameplay, and overall being a great adaptation of the beloved Marvel team. It makes you wonder if this type of love and care was put into Avengers, how would that have turned out?
Pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
I think it's more than fair to say that fighting games wouldn't be where they are today. Hell, wouldn't really be, just wouldn't be, if it wasn't for Street Fighter 2. So much so that people were clamoring for Street Fighter 3, but it took forever to get there. And before then, we got a game called Street Fighter Alpha, which was a prequel to Street Fighter 2. Now, why is Street Fighter Alpha on this list? Well, you see, when the game first entered development, Capcom gave the devs a deadline of 3 months. 3 fucking months! And sure, it was eventually extended to 6, but that was it. That game you are looking at as I talk, and sold well enough and was received well enough to start a whole sub-series for Street Fighter, was in development for 6 months. I know game development has changed so much, so even the strictest of deadlines today would be at least like a year, unless you're, Skull Island Rise of Kong, and it was also not as expensive back then as it is now. But still, you look at that time frame, and no way does a game as good as Street Fighter Alpha come from that. Even though it's not even the best of the Alpha games, Street Fighter Alpha being as good as it is in 6 months is a miracle.
I'm a Luigi, number 1.
During the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox generation, it was just normal to get lazy and cheap license cash-ins, and most notably with superhero games. Look at Batman in particular. That generation gave us games like Dark Tomorrow and Rise of Sin Tzu, and many others that were critically panned. So in 2009, a developer named Rocksteady, who before this had only developed one game, a game called Urban Chaos Riot Response, which got a lot of mixed reviews, took the Batman license and made a new game with it. Again, at the time, Batman games were cheap and lazy cash grabs, so having a mostly unproven studio develop a Batman game was cause for concern. However, Batman Arkham Asylum came out and ended up being a fantastic game, as it had a very rich and deep story, fleshing out Gotham and the characters, having an iconic combat system that many games are still trying to replicate today, and overall still holding up today. To the point where games like Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League come out, and people are saying that Arkham Asylum still looks better than those two games. Sure, a lot of the other games on this list might have had a lot more going against them, but Batman Arkham Asylum came out, was critically acclaimed, and led to a sequel in Arkham City, which further perfected this formula. So had it not been for Asylum, superhero games would probably still be lazy cash grabs, and considering the track record of superhero games at the time, Batman Arkham Asylum comes in at number 1. So that was this list of the top 10 games that should have been bad but weren't. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me, not agree with me? I know this is kind of specific, but is there any game that you kind of expected to be bad but turned out was really good? Let me know down below. Anyways, be sure to subscribe or I will turn you bad. I don't know. Just subscribe, okay? Bye!